Greetings. You're listening to the CEIE podcast at Seattle University in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, where life is about making meaning.
This is Kara Markell with the CEIE podcast, and it is my delight to be in conversation today with Mary DeJong. Mary is an urban naturalist and eco-theologian who resides in Seattle's Rainier Valley in Columbia City. Mary refers to her work as sacred eco-awakening, which brings together the threads of deep ecology, eco-theology, eco-psychology, and applied mythology. This kind of personal and communal awakening is a holy endeavor, which is critical in our world today. There is much more to say about Mary, but I want to get into this conversation. So Mary DeJong, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kara, and hello, listeners. Grateful for your time, grateful for your listening ears, and leaning in with Kara and I into this time of conversation and wonderment.
So, Mary, I know that the idea of story and stories is so vital in your work. I wonder if you would begin by telling us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, I love stories. And I find that we get disconnected from a sense of story. Something maybe happens as we age or as we put away certain kinds of books that leave us disenchanted. And in that move, we get disenchanted with our own lives. So by reconnecting ourselves to the storied reality that we have lived through, that we live in, I think it's just such a helpful framework. So I guess if I were to tell you my story or a little bit about it, I would have to say, like these key features of my story would be that I grew up in the hinterlands of the North Cascades in a small kind of rural town on lots of land. And that probably formed my initial deep relationship with the natural world. And my story would have always had me, literally my nose was in books. I was an English literature major in undergrad and loved reading, loved the world of imagination. And I think also loved the world of the sacred. I ended up going to seminary at SU is when I started my kind of seminary work. Met my beloved in undergrad, and that has since led us to having a family of 4 kids. They are deeply embedded in my story. We live in the land of the Duwamish people. Actually, the name in the suit seat of the place that we live, yes, South Seattle, yes, Rainier Valley, but it's the suit seat name is Quatteach, and it means the land of the green and yellow spine. There's a story right there. So me and my kiddos, my husband Joel, live on the land of the green and yellow spine.
One of the things that relates to this idea of story and the importance of story in our spiritual lives and our relationships with each other or with the divine or with the earth is that we see in surveys, particularly this part of the world where people are leaving the religions of their upbringing, they're identifying in this. My favorite phrase recently is the nothing in particular. Even though they're not maybe outright rejection of the stories of their upbringing, but certainly finding that some of the ancient stories or the way those stories were used or interpreted is disconnected. I'm curious about how you find your way to stories, how you reimagine stories in your own work.
Well, I think that it's really important. This would come through the framework of applied mythology. This idea that stories are living entities. They're dynamic and they're animate. We did a thing that wasn't very helpful. I think was actually very problematic when we codified scripture and said that this is the ordained written word. Like it became unchangeable, immutable. It was no longer dynamic. Yes, living, but it couldn't really change. I mean, I probably gotten myself in a little bit of trouble sometimes when I've tried to change Genesis too much. That is actually in opposition to the very nature of story. So story, if we can accept it, at least for the span of our conversation, that it is animate, dynamic, living. It's also important to connect then story to the living earth, that the living earth actually speaks through story. That is the primary language of the earth. And so we have all of these stories and narratives that have come from, all around the world, different cultures, different people groups, different landscapes that provide an insight to particular places on the earth and particular people, but it also gives us insight into ourselves and to the sacred, particular aspects of the sacred. That for me gets really exciting because it certainly expands like the library of sacred scripture to include these tales, these stories, these myths, these legends from different parts of the world, and encounter them in ways that might invoke sacred wisdom from their pages. So this is coming from an idea then, like I said, that the earth speaks in myth, but an eco-theological perspective would actually say that the earth is the body of God. And so that from kind of doing a quick work of linking mythology, then kind of to eco-theology and putting them in conversation. So from that lens, if the earth is the body of God, if it's this sacred body, I just think that gets really, really interesting. And I think it also it helps us find ourselves again. So to those people who would say the stories of my religious tradition no longer work for me, I get it. But I think it's also important to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because when we throw out all of the stories, I really think that we lose ourselves. We lose an important plumb line that helps us put ourselves in a story arc or in a story continuum that reminds us of where we are. There is an archetypal journey round that humans are going through in all various eras of time. It might look different culturally, it might look different in different locations, but there are these movements that soul goes through, that spirit goes through as it's being formed. These ancient stories, these stories from various religious traditions, these stories from various landscapes, legends, myths, give us, I would again call it the story arc that helps land our own journeys into a place. Little Red Riding Hood doesn't stay in the woods the whole time, nor does she stay in the belly of the wolf. And so in these times in our own lives where we might feel like, oh, I'm so lost in, the metaphorical woods of my life, or, oh, I've just like really been consumed and eaten voraciously by culture or by my situation. Keeping a storied framework is like, okay, but you know what? I'm not going to be here forever. I'm going to get out. And I would say that that's where the value of stories still is for us today, that it reminds us that we're going to get through.
One of the ways that you do that is through what's called mythopoetics. And I love this. I think it's really a unique element of your work. And I'm wondering if you could say more about mythopoetics, what it is, and then how, particularly as a spiritual guide, or we might say in the Celtic tradition, this anamkara, how does mythopoetics come into that sort of relational, guiding, emergent kind of self-knowing?
Yeah, so mythopoetics is this kind of this big word, this big, I would even say big feeling word, because it's hard to pin down like a definition, but it invokes a feeling. So it is a word that is getting at the myth and the metaphor and the poetics of a place. It's really riding on the back of, I think I would say, an eco-spiritual perspective or idea that humans are nature. We've got to just really land that, because that allows then for mythopoetics to be this way that we explore landscape as metaphor for ourselves, So it's looking at features of a bioregion. It's looking at features of a landscape, be it a watershed, maybe a mountain, a deep forest, the sea. And it's being curious about the stories that are located there and the metaphors that are used to describe that, and then beginning to find your identity within those places or within an aspect of that landscape. If we are nature, there are watersheds within me, there are mountains within me, there's a sea within me. And there are metaphors that I would use to describe those locations within me and the mythopoetic and deep stories that are within me. So then you begin to do that work internally. The mythopoetics of a place allow a deep invitation, I guess, into an enchanted, storied encounter with a landscape. It is evoking the spirit of a place. This is again in conversation with this eco-theological idea that the earth is the body of God, and the deep ecology or the applied mythology idea that the earth speaks in story. So through a mythopoetic perspective, that's almost like where now you're practicing something. So now you have these big ideas of earth speaks in myth and the earth is the body of God. Mythopoetics, you're now in place. What is the story of that place? What are the myths? What are the metaphors? And how do they help define who you are? What do they court in you? What do they conjure in you? How are you in relationship to that story? And that's kind of gesturing with my hands, a very nebulous shape. That
Yes.
would be how I would probably
Right.
speak about that, because it's a fuzzy feeling word.
It reminds me of a particular Wendell Berry poem. I wish I could remember the title of knowing the reality of a place that's like no other place, and that there are no unsacred places. There's only sacred places and desecrated places, which I think is a really different way of engaging with the landscape around us, but also our interior landscape that you're lifting up, and resonates very deeply with the Celtic commitment to the sacredness of every person, the sacredness of every being in the cosmos, that we're connected.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about I think mythopoetics almost it's a posture instead of a definition. It's a posture that is almost on its knees, reconnecting to the sacramentality of the land. So with what Wendell Berry is saying, that there are sacred places or desecrated places. We are the ones who have desecrated them.
Right.
And so there's something about, maybe it's the act of the mythopoetic is what returns that sense of sacramentality again. That would almost say, though, that we're this agent of transference, like we're the agent through which something is sacred or not sacred. So it's not that. It's more of mythopoetics is a posture of acknowledgement of the sacramentality and deep animate nature of a place. And the Celtic people knew this. They walked in a landscape that was absolutely holy. Every bush was burning. Every fount was, every stream and spring and well was sacred water. It enhanced how they lived in a landscape and in their region.
For people who are listening and thinking, wow, this is like, I don't even know where to begin. Like, how do people begin to engage with their place in this posture? What's one little way that people can begin that relationship?
Oh, it's such a good question. And I think one that I've been holding for really a long, long time, and probably with a lot of missteps. And so I'll tell you a quick story that'll get to the answer of that. I thought I was in relationship with the land really, really well for a long time, till I realized that I had made a big misstep. A lot of my work is as an urban naturalist, and I've been participating in a restoration project in South Seattle for over 17 years now. My role within this forest restoration project has like a title and training, and I have a name tag and name cards, I have that say forest steward.
Yeah.
And for me, initially, I'm like, this is how you get to know a place. You
Mm,
steward it, and you're gonna, from that perspective or from that title, I'll get to be in relationship. For years, I really felt like that was the gateway. And even back then, I think I would have had some of this language and this way of knowing, but still I was on a walk within these Cheesty Woods, Quatich, with an elder, Ruth Highbear. She's Alabaskan. And we were kind of just putting our heads together to try to imagine a grant that we could use to engage Native youth in employing traditional Indigenous knowledge techniques for restoration practices on the land. And
mhm,
we're walking, and it's good. And I'm feeling really kind of quite proud, to be honest, of my steward role and all that I knew about the land. And she all of a sudden just stopped and bent down and picked up a piece of lichen from the ground and began to eat it.
mm,
And in that moment, I knew that I was beyond the world of my understanding.
mm,
I had enough, thankfully, I just had enough manners to be quiet
mm,
and perceive that something bigger than my stewardship role was going on now in this moment. She began to share with me that she is from the Caribou people, so the Athabascan people, and that when her body is wanting to connect with her ancestors or deeply connect with the land, it's like her body's devoid of a nutrient that lichen carries. And so her body will actually crave lichen because that's actually what the caribou will eat to get them through famished times. She just knows in her body when she craves lichen, that's a time to connect with ancestors and the spirit of her place. And in that moment, as she is teaching me so generously
mm,
this perspective, this reality, this deeply storied connection to place and culture and land, I've
mhm.
gotten something really wrong here.
Yes, yeah.
It was through that conversation and subsequent conversations with Randy Woodley, who's a Cherokee elder who works down in Portland, deep work with the land. When I brought him this question around, do I get to have access to the spirit of the place? Because I thought I did as a forest
Mhm,
steward, and he said, "Did you ever ask permission?
mm.
I mean, you
Wow.
got your badge, but
Yeah.
did you ever ask the land if you could steward it?" And he
Mm,
said one of the most holy postures we could ever take is that of kneeling and asking permission. That set me on a totally different course of learning and inquiry. And I'm so, so grateful for that Indigenous wisdom and realignment. There wasn't like a slap on the wrist because it was just so loving and kind and gentle, but also like, you
yes.
know what? The first step is actually to kneel on the ground wherever you are and ask permission to be in relationship. So for all of us, think about that. That's an easy thing to do. We really could go out the door right now and kneel on the land and ask permission. And yet, there is so much in that posture. There is so much humility and humbleness, right? All these words that in a moment ties us to the earth. So Ruth Highbear is Athabascan. She's of the Caribou people. When we kneel on the ground in a humble nature, we get close to the humus. We get close to the earth again. And I think that posture reconnects us to the storied reality that comes through the story of Genesis,
Mhm,
that we are earth people.
mhm,
And so there's something about then connecting to that posture and then connecting to that story that gives us an opportunity, an invitation to be in a deep, deep relationship with a place, with the spirit of a place. And then from there, devote yourself. The earth is not interested in one night stands. It's not. It is going to demand fidelity.
mhm.
There's another one I might kind of just expound on that a little bit like if someone were to be like, okay, well, I've kneeled, I've asked permission, I'm willing to be faithful. What next from that even then? One of my teachers is Martin Shaw. He's an
Mm,
incredible mythologist and storyteller. If you're not familiar with his work, he's incredible, and he's recently converted to Eastern Orthodoxy, and so there's like a whole new kind of world that he's engaging in. take some white chalk and draw a 5-mile radius around you. Get to know that land. Get to know its stories. So if you're living on land from which your ancestors have not emerged, respectfully get to know the stories of those people, of the indigenous people, and be curious about the new stories that might be emerging. This is okay to do. Because stories are dynamic, because the earth is ever changing, because the earth is always evolving, landscapes are evolving. There are new stories coming up and out of the land. So can we be in a posture and in a way that we can begin to have our ears to the earth, listening for the new emerging stories that will always be conversant with the ancient stories and the old stories, but might hold a nuance or a relevancy to our modern time. But yeah, so it's getting to know the stories, the original stories, listening for the new ones, learning about the flora and the fauna within that little radius, that little 5-mile radius. Let them become your teachers, learn their medicine, learn their food, learn how they can be used for shelter and clothing. Become a learner of those. And those are expressions of fidelity. It really is like relationship building. It's, when you have a friend or a partner or a beloved one, you want to know more about them. What do you think? What are you like in the wintertime? What are you like in the summertime? Devote yourself to the wild ones that are in that space, and they will begin to open themselves up to you. That's the nature of relationship. It's mutual.
One of the books that I love of yours that I use all the time still is your Rewilding workbook, which is rooted in, it's rooted in a lot of cycles, different kinds of cycles, but it's wonderful in connecting with sort of the natural cycle in the Celtic spirituality. We call it the wheel of the year, and sort of paying attention to it, at least, if not sort of attuning ourselves or aligning ourselves with that, with the cycle of nature, because we're often so separate from it, because we can leave our lights on as late as we want, and we can have strawberries any time of the year, and we can, so there's something about that also that enhances the relationship. Can you speak to your rewilding wheel a little bit, or your workbook, and why that's important?
Well, yeah, it's so helpful to remember that humans for thousands and thousands of years really aligned their lives with the seasons, right? I mean, that was how humans were embedded in a seasonal reality, and that informed their spiritual lives, their psyches, and really like their soul formation. And we're not too far gone from that. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that probably our grandparents were still embedded in the cycles and seasons of the year. So while we may say that we're, modern, and we have these modern conveniences that would extract us from these archaic agricultural realities, like it's not really that true. We still have the seasons, flowing in our veins. And so the rewilding wheel was an attempt to absolutely engage with the deep wisdom and celebrations that come through the Celtic Wheel of the Year, which honor the seasonal round of the year, but also kind of lifts up and elevates the importance of cardinal directions and elements that are all in conversation with the seasons. And there are various iterations of this sort of life wheel throughout indigenous cultures around the world. What I was interested in doing, though, was trying to land, like literally land and ground kind of the energetics, the spiritual energetics of Wheel of the Year into a bioregion as a way to support people in forming roots to their faith again, or bringing their own personal liturgical calendar like back into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just really done with any sort of theological stories or ideologies that would tell us that our home is anywhere else but here. And so the rewilding wheel was an attempt to align kind of these energetics with a place. So if one were to use the rewilding wheel as a way to kind of go around the seasons, they'd also be invited to deeply engage with bioregional features,
Mm-hmm.
such as the forest or mountains or high places, gardens and meadows, and then watersheds and the sea, and have those places become our teachers and deeply like become a deep student of these place-based features throughout the year. So that's kind of what the rewilding wheel has had at its heart. And it has been, I think, an incredible way for people to practice devotion to place and to also acknowledge that our human minds seem to kind of do something around 10 weeks, just like seasons do, like every 10 to 12 weeks. Like we're kind of like, all right, kind of done with that winter. I'm ready for spring. Or if you're in the university system, like I'm done with that semester. I'm ready for
Right.
something new. It does a similar thing. It like as the wheel turns, like right now we're in spring, and the kind of bioregional feature that is associated with spring is the forest. So I see the springtime as being a deep dive into all things forest, and for 10 to 12 weeks, that's my classroom.
Mm.
But beyond that, like that's my place of worship. That's my place of spiritual practice.
Mm.
The land is, I believe, divinely infused. And so if I can learn more about the forests, I'm probably learning something more about divine mystery also through the forests. It becomes what I would almost call sacred biomimicry, where we're being told, if we can learn to read it again through the scripture of the natural world, sacred truths that if we could mimic and mirror in our human lives, well, I don't know, it might solve world peace. That's what I, without being cliche. Like I
Oh,
really
I know.
think we have the potential for solving all of our huge tragic disruptions are literally written within the roots of the forest.
One of the things that you do in the world is called wild soul guidance. And I wanted to ask you, I think you're getting to it. What does it mean to have a wild soul? And
Mhm.
and what why is that important in the world, maybe particularly today? You're starting to name it, I think.
I might say that there's something about the stories that we have told, at least from, the tradition that I grew up in, that caused a severance. It caused me to believe that as a human, I was completely separate from the natural world. And again, that my ultimate home and my primary home even was not on this earth. And it was, this heavenly home. And it's stories like that, I think, that have caused severe symptoms of separation and severance that have resulted in a whole host of problems and what I would even call dis-ease. We are a diseased people because we're holding this tension of being on this planet where we should be enhomed, but with some sort of story that we're not meant to be here or something, right?
Mhm.
So there's this tension. I believe firmly that we are earth people. We're meant to be here. And so I would say that the wild soul work, or I would maybe even say more like rewilding,
Mhm.
is the work of returning ourselves back into whole relationship with the earth. Ecologically or conservationally, with land projects, rewilding is a term that talks about bringing landscapes back into whole functioning ecological relationship. It's returning then apex species or land bridges or features of that bioregion or that particular ecology that will ensure holistic flourishing.
Mhm.
And applied to our soul life, applied to our spiritual life, it acknowledges that there's a broken ecology, a broken spiritual ecology. And I think as the world is deconstructing and reconstructing, as a lot of people who have grown up in faith traditions are deconstructing their faith, they're returning or reconnecting to the sense of that vital life energy and wanting to reconnect it to their faith or to their how they express ritual and ceremony in their life. And so through Wild Soul Guidance, I companion people in that kind of deconstruction, reconstruction work while looking to the natural world for additional, like it becomes almost like a triad. Like if you're familiar with therapeutic work, like we're bringing in the natural world as part of our session, and we're looking for guidance and wisdom and breadcrumbs even from the landscapes around us that help us become whole again. And when we are whole and when we are healed, I believe firmly that that's how the earth gets healed and becomes whole again too.
In my experience of your work, you often share blessings from different wisdom traditions, and blessing, I think, is kind of a lost art in our world. And I'm wondering if you have a blessing that you could share with our listeners.
I do. Yes, the art of blessing ourselves and each other is a lost art, and it's something that we can pick up. It's a way of naming that which is most essential and true in a moment or in a person, and then calling in like the best possible future for that moment or for that person. And it is something that we are each particularly enabled and empowered to do. And I'd invite you all to bless each other and yourselves as much as possible. But what I wanted to share today, it's a very well-known Celtic blessing, deep peace. But this one, I love, this is an adaptation of that written by a woman named Mary Rogers, who just kind of expands the blessing a little bit. This is deep peace. Deep peace of the running wave to you, of water flowing, rising and falling, sometimes advancing, sometimes receding. May the stream of your life flow unimpeded. Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you, which fans your face on a sultry day, the air which you breathe deeply, rhythmically, which imparts to you energy, consciousness, and life. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you, who, herself unmoving, harbors the movements and facilitates the life of the 10,000 creatures, while resting contented, stable, and tranquil. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. And lastly, deep peace of the shining stars to you, which stay invisible till darkness falls and discloses their pure and shining presence, beaming down in compassion on our turning world. Deep peace of the shining stars to you. May it be so.
Yes,
We need it.
we do.
Yeah.
For our listeners, you can find out more about Mary and Mary's work at waymarkers.net. Mary DeJong, what a gift to be in conversation with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kara. It's always fun. It's always fun to see where the story takes us.
You've been listening to the CEIE podcast at SU. Visit our Theolab at religica.org or the renowned International Journal of Local Stories from around the world at theinterfaithobserver.org, and participate in emerging opportunities at our main website. That's seattleu.edu/CEIE. Thank you.